What happens when one man tries to watch all of the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. The project is just moving along now. We're knee deep into 1982, but I figured I would take a second here in case people didn't see my video announcing it that the 80s Project is now a book series and volume 1 is now available. The ordering information will be in the description below. It's hardcover book, full color, and covers all of the horror of 1980. But for now, let's dive in and see how the early fall season of 82 is looking. We'll start this block in the US, and on September 14th, there was a premiere. Although IMDb says New York, while Wikipedia says Los Angeles. But either way, the film that screened was Blood Tide. It starts with a virgin sacrifice, and then we have Kreese and Mandy Pepperidge, and they're on vacation in Greece, looking for Neil's missing sister. They meet up with Miguel Ferrer's dad, the mayor of the island, and manage to find Madeline. She's in the care of Mufasa. But there's also someone here who's a little too close for comfort. Fry is a treasure hunter, and he finds a mysterious underwater cave, same as the one from the opening, and he uses dynamite to try to break through. The next day, everyone is on the beach, and Madeline is acting strange. And after Barbara is attacked and killed by something in the water, it seems like there's something suspicious going on. Eventually. And this was the directorial debut of Richard Jeffries, who also co-wrote the film. After this, though, he'd only direct one other picture, a TV movie in 2008, although he'd write several other films, such as 1988's Scarecrows. The other co-writer was Nico Mastarakis, and his was a more notable name since he was a pretty noted Greek producer and a director, and would also later direct The Zero Boys and Ninja Academy. Apparently, at one point, Jeff Bridges was in discussion to play the lead, but it looks like that fell through, and Martin Kove ended up with the part. According to Mary Louise Weller, the original script didn't include any monsters at all, and insinuated the film was more of a write-off, or a money laundering affair, and was pretty unhappy with the finished product. It was released as both Blood Tide, one word, and Blood Tide, two words, but also played on TV as Demon Island and the Red Tide. It's likely because of the spacing issues with the title. For a bit, it was thought to be in the public domain, and some quickie DVD companies put out some versions, although it was actually still under copyright. But because of that, you can find it on a whole bunch of those packs that had like 10 movies on one DVD. When the film was restored and released in a new version, Mastarakis was asked how he would handle people believing it to still be public domain and bootlegging it, and he responded with threats. It didn't get any sort of wide release in the States, and the reviews were mediocre at best, with TV Guide actually saying that it was embarrassing for everyone involved. And I don't know if I'd call it embarrassing, but I'm not really a fan. I'll give it 2.5 out of 5 tapes. There's some fun, but nowhere near enough of it. Its significance is only a 1.5 since it's really obscure, even with some big players involved, and no real names behind the scenes. Should you watch it? If you do, it's just to watch James Earl Jones having a blast.
Tried to save her from...
From what?
Why? From what?
This next one is a film that I suppose could have been back in the 1980 Project episodes because it did screen at Cannes in May 1980, but it didn't get a home release until September of 1982 in the UK, and it's Blood Bride. We meet Marie here, and she's having some love troubles. She's also very religious, and everyone is giving her a hard time about not being married. Like, even her boss is bringing it up. One day, a client asks her to lunch. She goes, and they hit it off and begin dating. After a short while, he begins to tell her about his tragic upbringing, as he was raised by a nun after his parents were killed, and then asks Maria to marry him. But it appears as if he may also have some extracurricular activities that involve prostitutes dressing up like nuns and killing them. They move in together in his big old gothic home, and from then on, it's a slow descent into madness. I guess emphasis on the slow part of all of that. And this one was directed by Robert J. Avrek, and he also wrote it. And I guess people liked his writing more than his directing because this would be the only thing that he would handle. But a number of his scripts would then be used. He was the writer for Body Double and quite a few thriller-style TV movies, and even won a Daytime Emmy for writing The Devil's Arithmetic that would star Kirsten Dunst and Brittany Murphy. Oddly, much like Blood Tide, Blood Bride was also released both with and without a space in between its two words, but I guess was also put out there as Death of a Nun in the UK. This is probably one of the harder to track down films, and there's really not much information out there floating around since it seems like it's one that's infrequently talked about. One minor tidbit is that the role of Mary, who doesn't really appear in the film all that much outside of a few random flashback shots, is played by Jocelyn Javits. At around this time, she was a popular model and had just been featured in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. However, this would be her only film credit, and she doesn't even have any lines in this. And holy cow, is this one a drag. It's just so slow and dull that I can only give it a 1.5, and the 0.5 is for the cinematography, which is nice. Its HCS is just a 1 since it's really obscure and never made any sort of dent on the genre. Should you watch it? I would leave this bride at the altar.
I love you!
Let's continue our journey into Blood on October 1st, going into the Halloween month. And we had Blood Tide and Blood Bride, so now let's check out Blood Song. This one starts in a pretty hilarious way. A guy in 1955 comes home from work to find his wife in bed with some other guy, and then kills them both, and then himself, all of which is witnessed by his young son, Paul. And Paul's reaction? It then jumps to 1982, 27 years later, and Paul is locked up in an institution and still playing that damn flute. And he kills one of the orderlies and escapes. Meanwhile, Marion here is recovering from a car crash and has to wear a leg brace, and she's just an angel. An avenging angel, even. Her dad is kind of a dick, and her boyfriend works for Luca Brasi, and she keeps having these visions of people being killed. She also has a vision that after the accident, she was given a blood transfusion, and she's told that it came from a prisoner in the institution, and it looks like she shares a psychic connection with Paul through a blood transfusion, because as everyone knows, your memories are stored in your blood, which is a basic science fact. Meanwhile, grown-up Paul, who is still playing that flute, is played by Frankie Avalon. Yes, teen heartthrob of the 50s and 60s and king of the beach. Here he is chucking axes into people's heads. And soon, things are bleeding into each other when Marion encounters Paul in real life, and leading to a classic game of cat and mouse. And the director here is Alan J. Levi, and he's got a huge filmography when it comes to TV and had been handling various shows since 1969. And this guy handled episodes of The Bionic Woman, the old Battlestar Galactica, the old Hulk show, Magnum P.I., Knight Rider, Lois and Clark, Hercules, and even Buffy. In fact, this appears to be the only theatrical release project that he did, out of 75 credits. He did other movies, but every single one of them were TV movies. This didn't get that wide of a release though, and the UK decided it was a little much, and although they didn't put it on the banned video nasty list, they did decide to seize and confiscate it. One funny thing is that a company called Coast to Coast Video got the distribution rights for it in the 1990s and put it out under the title Dream Slayer, and made sure that the word Slayer looked a little familiar. And I'm going 2.5 here. The entire front half of this movie is dull. Same old stuff that you've seen before, but better. But it almost makes up for it by having a great final 15 minutes with Frankie Avalon having a blast in a forklift. And one hell of a downer ending. Its significance is a 1.5 since it's fairly obscure and doesn't stand out against the other slashers of the era, but at least has a couple of recognizable faces. Should you watch it? Probably. I mean, it's okay, but most of what's worth watching is at the very end.
I like you, Marianne. I really like you.
Before we dive into the rest of October, I want to cover a couple with no set release dates. And the first one is said to be from 1982, and it's the Toxic Slime Creature. It's shot on glorious video and gives us a factory, and Jimmy here doing a card trick, and it's hard to tell if it's a good one since there's a freaking edit right in the middle of it. And then there's this old storage closet that hasn't been opened up in what this guy says is like 15 years. Suddenly, there's a huge train wreck outside that is conveyed through sound effects because clearly there's no budget here to show it, and it unleashes some sort of toxic chemical that kills one of their crew and releases fumes into the air, making it so that they can't go outside. They're a bit frantic to keep inside and prevent the toxic air from getting them, and meanwhile, there's lots of shots of the goo, and it bubbles and bubbles some more. After a short while, the body of another one of the workers shows up in the lower levels, clearly attacked by something. And then something comes after them, and it's some sort of creature. They say that it's around the size of a horse, and also that it doesn't have legs.
How can it not have legs? What doesn't have legs?
And they then have to try to survive the creature's attacks without being able to leave due to the toxic chemicals outside. Meanwhile, is it just me, or is Jimmy just basically like Melvin from the Toxic Avenger? And this little slice of home video is from Kenneth Zolo. He also wrote the movie and produced it and did the cinematography and was basically the only crew on the film. Now, at this particular point in time, the SOV market didn't really exist. It doesn't appear as if this got any sort of release or distribution, but it likely played in the local theaters in Morristown, New Jersey, where this was filmed. It was released on home video at some point by a company called Vidamax Carlson International, and it said that their offices had a fire that destroyed a number of the master copies that they had on hand, and some of them were only partial copies. Because of that, any versions of this film are essentially copies of copies, which accounts for some of the quality. Also, I have to say that there's a possibility that this might have been a partial copy, because it doesn't have an ending. The movie just sort of stops in mid-action, and it sort of feels like there's a chunk omitted. Now, I have to admit that even though the quality of this screams home video, there are big chunks of it that appear to possibly be 8mm, although it's hard to tell if that's a byproduct of the multiple duplications. Zolo never really made any other films, and there's really not much information on him or interviews or the like, but I'm guessing that since this never really went anywhere, that he just sort of left the filmmaking behind. You do sort of get some creature action, although not much, and it's hardly ever on screen with the actors, but it kind of looks like a big slug. Definitely does not have legs. And I give this a 2. I want to like this more because I tend to favor backyard movies like it, but honestly, just not enough happens. Its significance is a 1, since this is one of the more obscure films on the entire project, and it's really, really hard to find. Should you watch it? Probably not. There's more enjoyable things with the word toxic in them out there.
Oh,
Laura,
wait for me.
soundly attractive.
Here's another with a release date that might be unknown, although some sources do say June 15th, although others say it was never released in theaters, and it's The Dark Room. It opens up in the location of our title and introduces us to young Mike, who is an amateur photographer. But he also discovers that his dad is having an affair, and starts to follow his mistress around. He takes photos of her and has these constant battles with his dad about growing up and what type of man that his father expects him to be. But Mike also manages to meet Nikki and form a bond with her by offering to take photos, and they develop a relationship of their own. Things escalate when Ray is planning to leave his wife for Nikki, and Mike starts sending photos of the affair to him for blackmail. And so far, it's mostly like a tense sort of family drama with a droning score to keep things moody. But when the pictures don't elicit the desired response, Mike has to ratchet things up a bit, complete with kidnapping. And this one is from Australia and was directed by Paul Harmon, and he was the son of the noted Australian producer Bill Harmon. And this was Paul's directorial debut. He also co-wrote it, but his career didn't really take off after this, and in fact, it was more than 10 years before he'd be involved in anything else in the industry. And even then, he did 2 episodes of a TV show, and then one more film, and that's it. It was apparently a very contentious shoot since the actors didn't like the script and ended up changing a lot of the dialogue during rehearsals. And then, while reviewing the dailies, the Money Men were very unhappy with the footage that they were seeing and asked for Harmon to be replaced. The producer refused to do so, and the director remained on the project. It was made on a pretty low budget of just over 1 million Australia bucks, but it was never able to get a theatrical run. Instead, it was just released direct to video and only got a smattering of play on television, but in 1989, 7 years later. One little claim to fame that it has is in the very beginning of the film, there's a couple of Mike's fellow students that are going to a party, but he chooses not to go with them. Well, one of the students is played by young Baz Luhrmann, a good 10 years before he'd make a splash as a director and end up nominated for a couple of Oscars. The other weird thing about this one is it's never been released on either DVD or Blu-ray, and only exists in the world on VHS or digital format. And I'm a 2.5 on this one as well, and yeah, this block's a drag so far. Nothing's gotten more than 2.5, but this is just a little too slow and doesn't know what it wants to be. I do like the mood it's laying down, though. Its significance is another one, though, since no one knows about this and it is never talked about. Should you watch it? I'd say you could likely leave this one in the dark.
Why? Giving you a hard time, huh? Jesus.
Okay, let's get back to October and see if we can turn this block around. And we're back at October 1st, and we're looking at The Slayer. 1 year before Show No Mercy. And wrong Slayer. This one starts with Kay here, who's been plagued by some bad dreams lately, and her husband, plus her brother and his wife, all go on vacation together. They go to this remote island with no communications, which is clearly a horror movie setup. If someone said to me, we're going to this place, but we have no way to contact literally anyone, I'm taking that to immediately mean that slashing is about to begin. Well, when they get there, weird things start to happen as Kay recognizes their building from her surreal dreams, and the creepy pilot tells them that there's a storm coming in. And apparently, something is on the island doing some light killing. Before long, they're all stuck in the building because of the big storm, and something comes a-callin', although it soon becomes hard to tell what is reality and what's all in Kay's head. And this one's got a lot of attention, and it was both directed and co-written by J.S. Cardone, and it was his first gig as a director. He'd go on to helm a number of lower-budgeted genre numbers like Shadow Zone, The Forsaken, and 8mm 2, the very unseen sequel to that Nick Cage flick. He would also produce a number of things, although he often didn't produce the movies he directed. Instead, that role would frequently be filled by Carol Cottonbrook, who plays Brooke in this one, and she's Cardone's wife, although it's not clear if they were married at the time that this film was being made. It's said that he was inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft, although there's not a ton of that in the movie, although there's hints here and there. But he managed to get funding for this film while working as a clerk at a Los Angeles liquor store, and they landed a budget of around $750,000. The place that they filmed at was mostly abandoned and run down when they were filming, but it's since become revamped and is now a minor tourist location. When it was released, it drew the ire of the UK censors who seized it, banned it, and put it on the video nasty list, and couldn't be released there until all of the gore was removed. Weirdly, when it was put on video, it was released as a sort of double feature that cut out 5 minutes of content in order to fit both movies on one cassette, but they left that gore in and just cut out the story elements. It gets pretty wild by the end of it all, and I have to say that if you go to this one because of the cool creature that they had featured on the box art, you're gonna be upset to know that it is literally in about 3 seconds of footage. And I'm going with a 3 on this one, and it's a step in the right direction, but it's still a bit slower than I'd like, and if it weren't for the whole dreams aspect, it plays out like a regular slasher flick that you've seen before. Its significance is a 2, since it's still fairly obscure and not spoken of too much, but it gets that extra point for being on the nasty list. Should you watch it? Yeah, I mean, it's worth a shot.
Merry Christmas, Kay.
We're still on October 1st, and we're getting to a movie that I'm ridiculously happy to talk about, and it's Jekyll and Hyde Together again. And in case you weren't sure what kind of movie this was going to be, someone snorts the opening title. We start by knowing that Dr. Jekyll here is the top surgeon out there, and he works for Judah Zachary. And his nurse here, even though you never see her actual face in this movie, is Elvira, right around the time that the character premiered on TV. Jekyll is actually Navin Johnson, and yes, Mark Blankfeld played Navin in the TV movie sequel called The Jerk 2 with a T-O-O, and was coincidentally in another TV movie sequel called Splash 2, also with a T-O-O. And I love this man, and if I could have one guest on this show, it would be him. Jekyll is retiring from surgery in order to develop drugs to allow humans to tap into their survival instincts within. His so-called fiancée is Angela Chase's mom, and he's friends with the resident plastic surgeon, Jack Death, and one day has to help out a young woman named Ivy. And also, for like 1 second, Norm! That night, while working in his lab, he falls asleep and accidentally snorts some of his own formula, and is transformed into a party animal, complete with chest hair, fancy rings, and, a boner. He then goes out into town and encounters Ivy.
That's my name, Hyde. Mr. Hyde.
Don't you have a first name?
No, my parents lacked imagination.
And then has to lead the double life of nervous, frazzled Jekyll and wild, coke-addled Hyde. And you're also getting little appearances by Noelle North, who we just saw in Bloodsong, Seinfeld's mom, the Sandlot babe, Tony freaking Cox, Bastian, and even Lin Shaye. And obviously, this is a comedic take on the Jekyll and Hyde tale, and it follows the original story fairly close, down to the father figure interfering in the Doc's wedding plans. And it was directed by Jerry Belson, who was mostly known for his writing, and was the creator of The Odd Couple and The Tracy Ullman Show. He didn't do a great deal of directing, and in fact, he only did one more movie after this, but continued to write up until his death in 2006. It was a rushed production since there was the writer's strike in 1981, and Paramount decided to rush a few films out in order to have product ready to go if one happened. And they figured that they could make this one quickly and cheaply. It seems that at one point, the studio was afraid that viewers would confuse this one with the actual horror films and demanded that the title be changed to not include the words Jekyll or Hyde, and Belson suggested Nosedive, Split Personality, and A Tale of Two Nostrils. But ultimately, they went ahead with the original name. The initial test screenings were so positive, and people liked Hyde so much that they went back to shoot more scenes with him, including the whole arcade bit and the car stunt. It cost around $5 million to make, and even though it was a pretty modest budget, it bombed at the box office and only made a little less than $4 million. It would go on to be a cult favorite on cable and VHS though, because let's face it, who can resist that ending musical number? And call me crazy, but this is a 4 from me. It's all nostalgia, because it's probably not that good, but I've seen this movie more times than I can count, and I am probably watching it as you're viewing this video. Its significance is only a 2.5 though, since it can only be referred to as a cult classic, but is a take on a massive character and has a laundry list of recognizable faces. Should you watch it? Yes, you should, because Hyde's got nothing to hide. We're still on October 1st because that day was just chock full of horror and horror-related releases, but this next one dips into the darker side of humor, and it's Eating Raul. We're set in Hollywood and told that crime is out of control, and I agree because they show someone putting ketchup on ice cream, and that dude should be arrested. Paul Bartel is here, as is Mary Woronov, and they play a married couple, and they actually appeared together so frequently during this era that it was often misconstrued that they were an actual husband and wife in real life, although Partel was openly gay. Here, they live in an apartment complex and thinking about opening a restaurant together, but Paul has just been fired, and they're worried about money. When a drunk partygoer makes his way into their apartment and tries to attack Mary, Paul kills him. They decide to hide the body and try to get a loan from Buck Henry, and they keep getting screwed over, and when yet another man tries to molest her, he also gets the pan. They come up with a plan to lure in rich perverts and kill them to take their money, and advertise Mary as a dominatrix. And encounter Commander Chakotay as a shady locksmith, and his name is Raul, so I'm guessing he's gonna get it. He breaks into their place and discovers their scheme, and oh look, it's Christie's pet peeve. Mary's pajamas have this crease going down the side, which means that it was just bought and likely never worn. Costume designer bought those as new, and they didn't steam out the new product creases that would be there if they were PJs that someone had for a while and had slept in. They make a deal with Raul to discard of the bodies, and Stan Sitwell pops in, and this guy is Jambi the Genie. And when Raul and Mary start a torrid affair, it kicks off a silent battle between the boys. And this one was directed by Bartel himself and was done on a pretty low budget of $500,000. As a money-saving option, it was shot using short ends, which I've talked about here before, but it's basically the remainders of reels of film that were unused from other productions. It was often defective and would lead to some unpredictable results. If a lot of the side performers look familiar, it's because a number of them were members of the Groundlings, a popular LA comedy troupe at the time that is still going, and was the starting point for an onslaught of great comics. One Groundling member that was meant to be in this was Paul Reubens. He turned it down for one reason or another, but got his friend John Paragon the role. It ended up being a mild success and pulled in $1 million at the box office, and the reviews were pretty decent, but it would end up becoming very popular on cable and VHS, and soon claimed a spot as a bona fide cult classic. The Blands would later appear in Chopping Mall, and a sequel was planned called Bland Ambition, which was meant to feature Chevy Chase, and there's conflicting information about it. One source says that there was a script ready to go in 1989 and was about 10 days away from the start of filming. Vestron, the distributor, suddenly pulled the money. But there's other information out there that says that the script wasn't finished until much later, and Paul told Mary that he had completed it and found funding and then passed away 1 day later. It's unclear if it's meant that it's two different scripts being discussed or if one source of the information is mistaken. And holy cow, is this fun. I love this and I give it a 4. It's just wickedly dark, very funny, and a real treat. Its significance is a 3 since it's very cult, and I think has been seen quite a bit, but never really made it into the mainstream and didn't really impact the genre. Should you watch it? Yes, make your reservation now.
What is your scene anyway?
We invite swingers to our place and then murder them for their money.
This next film came out just 1 day later on October 2nd, and it's breaking the rules that I set up for the project, but I figured that its inclusion was merited since we're talking about The Boogeyman. It gives you this guy, Lester, and if he looks a little familiar, it's because you're used to seeing him say, "My sword is by your side." His daughter dies, but it turns out that just a few months ago, another of Lester's children had died under mysterious circumstances as well, so the police are obviously suspicious. He goes to see a psychiatrist and seems very afraid of the closet and says that the boogeyman killed his kids emerging from the closet. He then begins to tell the story of his kids being afraid of the dark and the events that followed, and this one breaks my rules because it's a short film. Instead of a feature, this runs at just under half an hour, and I decided long ago that the project would only be 4 features, but this one deserves to be talked about. It's an adaptation of the short film also called The Boogeyman by Stephen King that originally ran in Cavalier magazine back in 1973 and was collected in a 1978 collection, Night Shift. It was adapted by Jeff Shiro and was part of what was known as the Dollar Baby program. King would allow students or amateur filmmakers the rights to one of his short stories for only $1. Since most of the films made under the program were student films and the like, it's not known exactly how many of them are out there, but this is the first really known one. It made such an impact that it was actually granted commercial distribution. It was packaged with the Frank Darabont short of The Woman in the Room, and released as Stephen King's Night Shift collection. It didn't do a whole lot to launch Shiro's career though, since he basically only directed an episode of Tales from the Dark Side, and then co-directed a TV movie 20 years later. It looks like he did get into editing though, and had a bigger career there, handling a lot of what appears to be history-oriented documentaries. It's a fairly faithful and accurate interpretation of the short story, and is nicely effective. Of course, the short will be adapted again in 2023 in a full-length feature that is less faithful, less accurate, and considerably less effective. And I give this one a 3. It's a nice little short that does a great job with building dread and mood. The pacing is a little iffy though, even at 28 minutes. Its HCS is a 3 as well, since it's the first King short to get out there, and was seen quite a bit, but has still not reached the level that other adaptations did. Should you watch it? Sure, just check your closets first.
It is only a game, Mr. Billings.
Okay, the earlier part of this list may have been a touch on the bland side, but it ends in a wild way, because on October 8th in Italy, there was the premiere of Pieces, which wouldn't get a US run until September of 1983. It begins back in 1942 with little Timmy putting together a jigsaw puzzle of a naked lady, and his mother catches him and goes to throw it all away, and he hacks her up with an axe. When the police arrive, he pretends like he didn't do it and that the killer escaped. It then jumps ahead 40 years, and Timmy's all grown up and still has a box of mommy's bloody clothes and an old jigsaw puzzle. The young girl is then attacked and decapped by a masked man with a chainsaw, so Christopher George is on the case, the man responsible for the single greatest death scene in all of cinema. Professor Brown is here looking like a suspect, but probably not as much as this guy here, because he's mean. He's mean. He's mean. You know what I mean? Another girl is sawed at the indoor pool, and it soon becomes apparent that the killer is making a sort of jigsaw puzzle of his own. And this one was a dual production between America and Spain, and although it's meant to take place in Boston, it was shot overseas. The director was also Spanish, and it was Juan Piquer Simon, and this is his first appearance on the project. And we'll see him later on with one of my favorite silly creature flicks, Slugs. This movie's script began as a treatment for a TV movie called Jigsaw, but Simon took it and developed it further, clearly adding some of the more gruesome elements. Shooting was fairly tricky since it features a group of women who are meant to be a tennis team, and none of the actresses hired knew how to play tennis, so a coach had to be brought in to make it look like they had some ability. Simon caused a ruckus as well when he wanted a group of women doing aerobics to be naked in the scene, and when the film's instructor, who was an actual aerobics instructor in real life, refused and said that the concept was very unrealistic and aerobics classes were not really done in the nude, and Simon was irritated but relented. The cast would include Linda Day George, who had already appeared on the project in the 1980s Beyond Evil, and she was married to Christopher George, although they're not playing a couple here. This one was very controversial on release since, first up, the reviews were fairly harsh, and it was essentially just called an overly violent misogynistic mess of a movie. It very easily landed itself on the UK Video Nasty list and was seized and confiscated, although it wasn't one of the films that was prosecuted. It ended up performing pretty well, though, since it had a budget of around $300K and managed to earn about $2 million in ticket sales, which prompted them to want to do a sequel, but Juan had already moved on to another project. But after a little while, he tried to get one going, although by then it seemed as if the interest had passed. It said that a copyright for Pieces 2 was filed around 1988 or 9, but nothing ever became of it. Oddly, not only has there been no sequel, but no remake either. I give this one a 3.5. This one is quite a bit of fun, but it's not really that great. Some of it feels pretty standard slasher stuff, but the things that are pretty distinct to itself are quite a bit of fun, and that gets it to 3.5. Its HCS is the same, since this is another one that I feel is very cult and very niche, and definitely a lot of hardcore horror fans have seen this, but it's never really reached that more mainstream status and become much more of the cultural zeitgeist. Should you watch it? Oh yeah, you should definitely put this puzzle together.
The lousy bastard was in there killing her! Bastard! Bastard!
So there you have it, the movies of the beginning of the fall of '82. And I have to say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it. My favorite of this block is Jekyll and Hyde Together again. I love that movie. I'm sorry. I know that it's dumb, but I just love it so much. Let me know which is your favorite down below. Let me know which of these you liked the most. I'd like to hear that. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you're enjoying the project, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you can know when more are coming out. And also consider going to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this project and keep it going. Otherwise, I'll see you very shortly, because we're getting close to the ending of 1982. We're getting right around that Halloween season, so things are about to start getting spooky right here on the 80s Project.